Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking something literally mind-bending. We're looking at a totally unique framework for understanding human consciousness. It's called the Surfism Theory of Self, developed by writer and philosopher Dan Weber. It's this radical, incredibly visual theory that takes the heavy stuff, the complexities of the human mind, existential dread, our search for the divine, and maps it entirely onto the physical act of surfing. To set the stage here, Weber actually anchors his whole theory with this fantastic thought from philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. God, grant the philosopher insight into what lies in front of everyone's eyes. The big idea? The most profound truths about our existence, they aren't necessarily locked away in some abstract, cloudy mystery. Actually, they're often embedded right in the simple, familiar things right in front of us. Things we completely take for granted just because we're so used to seeing them every day. So that brings us to a really fascinating question. What if the deepest secrets of human consciousness, our spiritual meaning, and even our worst existential dread, what if all of that could be perfectly explained by a simple day at the beach? Seriously, what if the literal mechanics of riding a wave hold the exact blueprint for how we navigate reality? Well, Weber calls this concept surfism. It's a philosophical framework that maps the fluid dynamics of surfing, the waves, the reefs, the inevitable wipeouts, directly to human consciousness, the construction of the self, and our search for existential meaning. By the end of this explainer, you are going to see exactly how navigating the ocean totally mirrors navigating life itself. It's pretty wild. Section 1. The Ocean of Consciousness. Okay, to really grasp this theory, we first have to establish the physical environment of the mind. In surfism, the ocean wave represents the kinetic energy of the conscious mind itself. Then you have the seabed, or the reef that the wave breaks over. That represents our familiar circumstances, our culture, our rituals, the reliable, solid structure of the world around us. And in regular reef, well, that represents unfamiliar circumstances that distort the wave, making the ride of life significantly harder to navigate. Think about the actual physics of a wave for a second. A wave is essentially just kinetic energy carried in chains of orbiting water particles, right? When those deepest particles hit the solid seabed, the whole chain gets squeezed and compressed upward, which totally changes the wave's shape. Weber brilliantly points out that this is exactly how the mind responds to worldly stimuli. The kinetic energy of our consciousness interacts with the solid reality of our culture and circumstances, creating the breaking wave of our daily experience. But what happens when things go wrong? Which leads us to Section 2, drifting into the abyss. When we look at existential crises through this model, the crucial takeaway is that a total disconnection from the wave leads to two very troubled states of mind. First, you've got the drag. Imagine wiping out and just being dragged across the exposed, jagged reef. Ouch, right? Psychologically, this depicts a mind suffering from severe derealization. You're unable to discern your own presence. You're just left feeling like a completely detached, alienated observer in a dead world. Then, on the flip side, you have the deep paddle. This is when you abandon the surf break entirely and paddle way out into ominous deep water. It represents trying to find meaning without any cultural values or structure to support you. Without the reef to break the wave, trying to catch a swell in the open ocean is literally futile. To really drive home the absolute terror of the deep paddle, Weber brings in this stark quote from Bertrand Russell. That terrible loneliness in which one shivering consciousness looks over the rim of the world into the cold, unfathomable, lifeless abyss. Wow, that is the exact, visceral feeling of paddling out past the safety of our cultural reef and into the limitless, meaningless deep. And this brilliantly illustrates what the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called infinitude's despair. Kierkegaard noted that the self desperately needs both the infinite and the finite. If you plunge wildly into the infinite without the limiting factor of the finite, which, again, in our metaphor is that structured reef of culture, you completely lose yourself in the limitless open ocean. You absolutely need the reef to make sense of the wave. Okay, so now that we understand the ocean and the reef, how do we actually ride this thing? Section 3, Designing the Surfboard. In the surfism model, the surfboard itself represents the self. Navigating existence takes immense, active discipline. The literal design of your surfboard, meaning your constructed self, and how intimately it relates to the kinetic energy of the wave, that reveals your fundamental connection to spirit. Think about it. Without the board, you can't harness the energy at all. You're just out there getting tossed around in the wash. Weber takes a really objective, almost wry look at religion's historical role in all this. He actually equates Jesus to a shaper of selves, like a master surfboard designer.
Historically, Christendom operated kind of like a massive marketing department, releasing a basic, beginner model of the self. If you bought into it, you essentially joined the sales team. You got an identity and a lifelong occupation spreading the word. And hey, this business model was incredibly successful. It literally sustained Western civilization for centuries by providing a reliable, easy-to-use surfboard for the masses. But today, people just aren't buying that specific model as much anymore, which Weber suggests is exactly why society kind of feels like it's drifting into disarray right now.
Let's move to section 4, ego versus intuition. So let's say you're out there on your surfboard, actually riding the wave. You're going to face this deep internal tension. As a surfer, you have your visual perspective, right? What you can clearly see above the surface. This is driven by ego, vanity, and pride. But the ego constantly neglects the deeper reality. And that deeper reality is the vital, intuitive data streaming right through your legs, the literal feeling underfoot. That feeling represents instinct and intuition. If you only focus on what your ego can see above the water, you completely miss the intimate, unseen relationship between yourself and the universe's energy beneath you. To truly ride the wave, you have to make a major shift. You have to move from passively existing to actively becoming. Drawing from theology here, becoming means creating a conscious synthesis of the infinite wave and the finite reef. It requires real, genuine self-transcendence. You aren't just bobbing around passively in the water hoping for the best. You are actively shaping your ride, surpassing your own limitations, and shifting from emptiness to fullness. Finally, section 5, finding the optic flow. This brings us to the ultimate existential goal of the whole surfism theory. Like, what's the point of all this? Weber argues that the surfing analogy invites us to find meaning, or even God, not as some distant, superior being floating far away in the sky, but as a transcendent relationship that you perceive right in the immediacy of what he calls optic flow. Optic flow is that rushing, totally immersive visual and physical sensation you get when you are perfectly locked into the pocket of a breaking wave. The divine isn't some abstract concept, it is literally staring you in the face in the immediate, rushing flow of existence. Let's look at how this builds on the work of theologian Karl Rahner. He stated that the original experience of God can be so universal and so seemingly unreligious that it takes place wherever we are simply living out our existence. The profound spiritual presence happens right in the everyday mechanics of navigating life. It happens exactly when we tap into our own optic flow. When you look through the lens of surfism, even massive theological concepts like the resurrection make total sense, but as a psychological metaphor. The profound feeling of being reborn isn't about a mysterious being granting you magical absolution from on high. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a radical shift in how you perceive the very ground of your own being. It's that sudden, mind-blowing realization that your consciousness is seamlessly situated in the world's flow, finally catching the wave perfectly after a lifetime of wiping out. And that leaves us with something really, really important to think about today. When you look at the fluid dynamics of your own consciousness, are you merely drifting passively over the reef, risking the brutal drag of alienation, or that terrifying deep paddle of despair? Or are you actively shaping yourself, your surfboard, so you can tap into the intuition right under your feet and truly ride the optic flow of your own life? It's an absolutely brilliant framework from Dan Weber, and hopefully this gives you a whole new way to view the ocean and yourself. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.